Russia has a problem it cannot hide anymore, and the numbers are starting to tell a story that should make every military analyst nervous. If you have been following this war closely, you already know something big has been shifting. But if you want to understand what that shift actually means, stay right here. Because this is the part most channels are not connecting for you. For months, the public conversation about Russia's military has focused on troop numbers, territorial gains, and drone strikes. Those things matter. But underneath all of that, there's a quieter crisis building. A crisis that does not make dramatic headlines, but may be more decisive than any single battle. Russia may be running out of artillery shells faster than anyone expected. And when that becomes undeniable, the entire direction of this war changes. Let us start with why this matters so much. Modern warfare, especially the kind of grinding attritional war being fought in eastern Ukraine, runs on artillery, not just soldiers, not just tanks. Artillery shells, volume, the side that can pour more fire onto the enemy. War being fought in eastern Ukraine runs on artillery, not just soldiers, not just tanks. Artillery, shells, volume, the side that can pour more fire onto the enemy. Day after day, week after week, holds the advantage. And Russia built its entire military doctrine around exactly this. Massive, overwhelming firepower. Volume over precision. Flood the front with shells and exhaust the enemy. That doctrine worked for decades. It worked in Chechnya. It worked in Syria. And in the early months of Ukraine, it looked like it would work again. Russian artillery was firing at rates that shocked Western analysts. Some reports suggested Russia was firing 10,000, sometimes even 20,000 artillery rounds per day at peak intensity. For comparison, the United States military produces roughly a few 100,000 shells per year in peacetime. Russia was burning through that kind of volume in weeks, but that pace had a cost, and that cost is now coming due. Think about what you just heard. A country burning through ammunition at that speed cannot sustain it forever. The only question was always when, not if. Here's what changed. When the war began in February 2022, Russia had enormous Soviet-era stockpiles, warehouses and depots filled with shells that had been sitting in storage, but the pace had a cost, and that cost is now coming due. Think about what you just heard. A country burning through ammunition at that speed cannot sustain it forever. The only question was always when, not if. Here is what changed. When the war began in February 2022, Russia had enormous Soviet-era stockpiles, warehouses and depots filled with shells that had been sitting in storage since the Cold War. For the first year of the war, Russia was essentially drawing down reserves that took decades to build. That is what allowed the high firing rates, not new production. Old stock, and old stock, no matter how large, is not infinite. By late 2022 and into 2023, reports began emerging that Russia was pulling older and older ammunition from storage, shells from the 1980s, some reportedly even older. This matters because old shells are less reliable. They misfire more often, they are less accurate, and some simply do not detonate at all. That Russia was pulling older and older ammunition from storage, shells from the 1980s, some reportedly even older. This matters because old shells are less reliable. They misfire more often, they are less accurate, and some simply do not detonate at all. That is not a sign of strength. That is a sign of a supply chain under serious pressure. At the same time, Russia's domestic production was struggling to keep up. Western sanctions cut off access to key microelectronics and manufacturing components that modern shells and guidance systems require. Russia worked around some of this through parallel imports, buying parts through third countries. But workarounds are not solutions. They slow you down, they raise costs, and they introduce uncertainty into your supply lines at exactly the moment when certainty is most needed. So Russia turned to its allies. And this is where the picture gets even more revealing. North Korea became one of Russia's most important suppliers. This alone is extraordinary. One of the most isolated, economically desperate countries on Earth became a critical lifeline for what was supposed to be one of the world's premier military powers. Millions of artillery shells shipped from Pyongyang to Russian depots. Reports from South Korean and U.S. intelligence suggested the scale was enormous, hundreds of thousands of rounds, possibly over 1 million, maybe more. Let that sink in for a moment. Russia needed North Korea's shells to keep fighting. Does that sound like a country with a comfortable supply advantage? Iran also supplied drones and components. China, while officially neutral, supplied dual-use goods that ended up in Russian weapon systems. Russia was pulling ammunition from every direction it could reach. Multiple countries, multiple supply chains. And still, firing rates appeared to be declining by 2024 compared to the peak months of earlier in the war. Reports from the front began to shift in tone. Ukrainian soldiers and commanders noted periods where Russian artillery fire dropped noticeably. Not everywhere, not always. But the pattern was emerging. There were stretches where Russian fire was lighter than expected, followed by surges, then lighter periods again. Military analysts describe this as a rhythm that suggested supply constraints rather than tactical choice. And here is where strategy and arithmetic collide in a way that should genuinely concern Moscow. Russia still holds the advantage in overall artillery volume compared to Ukraine. That part is true. Ukraine has faced its own severe ammunition shortages, partly because Western allies were slow to ramp up production and deliveries. But the gap is narrowing, and the trajectory matters more than the current snapshot. Ukraine's Western allies have been accelerating shell production. The United States increased its 155mm shell production dramatically, going from a few 100,000 per year toward a goal of over 1 million. European nations have reopened old production lines and invested in new ones. South Korea has become a major supplier. The combined Western industrial base, once it fully engages, is vastly larger than Russia's. Russia has no equivalent coalition building capacity behind it. North Korea has limits. Iran has limits. China has chosen strategic caution over full military partnership. Can you see the shape of what is building here? On one side, a coalition slowly but steadily ramping up. On the other, a country drawing down stockpiles faster than it can replenish them. But here is something else that rarely gets discussed. It is not just about total numbers of shells. It is about the quality and types of shells available. On the other, a country drawing down stockpiles faster than it can replenish them. But here is something else that rarely gets discussed. It is not just about total numbers of shells. It is about the quality and types of shells available. Modern artillery warfare increasingly demands precision munitions, guided shells that can hit specific targets, smart rounds, extended range variants. Russia has struggled to produce these at scale. Sanctions hurt exactly here. The electronics, the precision components, the guidance systems. Russia has had to rely more heavily on older, unguided rounds, which means it needs even more of them to achieve the same effect. You need 3 times the unguided shells to achieve what one guided round can do. So even if raw shell numbers stay stable, the effective firepower per shell is declining. The math is brutal. There is another dimension that almost nobody talks about. Artillery barrels wear out. Each shell fired degrades the barrel a little. Fire enough rounds and the accuracy drops. Fire even more and the barrel becomes unsafe. Russia has been pushing its artillery systems hard, very hard. Sustained high-rate fire wears out equipment faster than any maintenance schedule can compensate. There are reports from various intelligence sources of Russian artillery units operating with degraded equipment, with systems that should have been rotated out but are still on the front line because replacements are not available fast enough. Now layer that on top of everything else: older shells, degraded barrels, imported rounds from a country whose own production quality varies, a supply chain held together partly by sanctions, evasion, and back-channel deals. This is not the picture of a military operating from a position of strength. Where does this lead next? If Russia's artillery capacity continues to erode, the tactical picture on the front changes in ways that ripple across the entire conflict. Artillery has been the primary reason Russian advances have been possible at all. Cover the advance with overwhelming fire. Suppress Ukrainian defensive positions, then push forward. If that fire cover becomes less reliable, less dense, or less sustained, Russian infantry is more exposed. Advances become costlier. The human cost rises. And here is the harder truth. Russia has been accepting enormous human losses. By multiple independent estimates, Russian casualties have run into the hundreds of thousands. That level of attrition is extraordinary. The only reason it has not collapsed is because the firepower advantage has partially compensated for tactical shortcomings. Take away that firepower advantage and the equation shifts dramatically. This is also why the timing of Western deliveries is not just logistically important, it is strategically decisive. Every month that Western production ramps up while Russian stockpiles decline is a month that changes the balance. The war is not just being fought on the ground, it is being fought in factories, in Pennsylvania, in South Korea, in depots across Poland. Industrial capacity is a weapon, and right now, the industrial math is slowly, quietly moving against Moscow. But Russia is not simply accepting this. This is the part that should keep people awake. Russia has been pushing diplomatically and economically to expand its supplier base. It has deepened ties with Iran to an extent that has alarmed the Middle East. It has built a relationship with North Korea so close that military personnel have been observed. Whether as advisors, technicians, or something more direct, that presence signals dependence. Russia has also been attempting to put its entire economy on a war footing, shifting industrial capacity, pressuring domestic manufacturers, paying enormous salaries to draw workers. The Russian government is trying to build its own production surge. It has made progress. But real progress, from a damaged industrial base, is still not enough to match the output. There is a phrase used in logistics circles: a supply chain is only as strong as its weakest link. For Russia right now, those weak links are multiplying. Components that cannot be sourced, barrels that cannot be replaced fast enough, North Korean shells that fail to fire, Iranian drones made with smuggled chips. This is a supply chain held together by improvisation. It can keep going, but not the way it did in early 2022. The war has changed. What you're witnessing is a slow-motion test of industrial endurance, not the kind of turning point you can point to on a single date, but the kind that is decided over months in factories and supply depots. The glamorous version of war is tactics. The real version is production rates. And right now, Russia's version of that war is under more stress than ever. Think about that as you watch the next set of headlines from the front. Behind every movement, there's an accountant somewhere looking at a spreadsheet, watching a number that everyone hopes does not reach zero. For Russia, that number is close. History is full of powerful militaries defeated by the slow exhaustion of their own logistics. Napoleon's armies, the Wehrmacht's fuel crisis, the Japanese Navy running short of pilots. Capability does not disappear in a single moment. It erodes, it degrades, it becomes brittle. It stays invisible until the exact moment when the pressure is greatest and the system cracks. Russia is not at that crack point today, but the direction of travel matters. The direction of travel, based on what we can verify, is not favorable for Moscow. The shells are being counted, the barrels are being tracked, the production lines are watched. Somewhere in all of that data, a picture is forming that is more important than the news. This war will not be decided by one dramatic offensive or a single political agreement. It will be decided by whether Russia can sustain the industrial weight of the fight. And right now, evidence suggests that weight is becoming heavier than Moscow planned for. The question is not whether Russia is feeling the strain, but how long it stays invisible. Because the moment it becomes visible on the battlefield, the entire strategic calculus shifts. Every enemy feels emboldened, every ally grows uncertain, and every military commander recalculates. We may be closer to that moment than most headlines admit. Stay sharp. Keep watching. Because when this story fully surfaces, it will not give a warning. It will just arrive. If you are not paying attention to the shell count, you will be confused. But now you are not confused. Now you know what to watch for. What do you think happens when that moment finally arrives? Let us know below.